Welcome to Scribecast, the podcast from the Heritage Foundation's Center for Media and Public Policy. My name is Lachlan Markay, and today we're joined by Mark Steyn, author of the new book, After America, Get Ready for Armageddon. Mark is also the author of the best-selling book, America Alone. He is National Review's Happy Warrior and a contributing editor to the Canadian news weekly Maclean's. He's also a regular guest host on Fox News' Hannity and Rush Limbaugh's radio program. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure, Lachlan.
So, Mark, since 2006, we've gone from America Alone to After America. What's changed in those 5 years?
Well, I think what happened in those 5 years is that my book was so influential, it basically warned that a combination of factors had created a perfect storm for Europe and for some of the oldest nation states in the world that was an existential threat to those countries, that the kind of combination of welfare that had led to a kind of civilizational ennui was putting a big chunk of the Western world out of business. What happened then was that my book was so influential that in 2008, whatever it was, 53% of the American people decided to sign up for the same program, supersized. And that's what's been so depressing about the last 3 years, because there's nothing new about any of this stuff. Some of us have seen it tried elsewhere around the planet. It's failed everywhere it's been tried. And the book acknowledges that this is not just Obama's fault, that in a sense all he did was put his foot on the throttle for trends that were chugging along in second or third gear, basically since LBJ's Great Society, and if you want to dig a little deeper back, were seeded during the FDR years. But that basically what Obama did was make explicit some long-term trends that pose a real threat to the United States of America.
Now, the title suggests a certain degree of inevitability here. So is there realistic, actual hope for reversing this trend sometime in the near future?
Well, I believe that decline is psychological in great powers, and that accepting the psychology of decline foreordains it. When you look at these lunatics on the streets of London, there was no need for the greatest empire the world has ever seen to decline into this hideous swamp of dependency with marauding packs of feral beasts in a mere 2 or 3 generations. That was not foreordained. The most important factor in that was liberal elites imposing the psychology of decline upon the nation. As I quote a very, certainly a non-right-wing, non-conservative think tanker in America, referring to a mediocrity of spirit. And I think you can certainly look at post-war Britain and say that it was certainly afflicted with a mediocrity of spirit, and that when you look at the reductive idea of America peddled by Obama, peddled by Harry Reid, peddled by Nancy Pelosi, and peddled by far too many Republicans, that is also crippled by a mediocrity of spirit.
So a cultural decline then leads to a political and economic decline, or is it more complex than that?
Well, I think it always starts with the money. It never ends there. The money is only a symptom. And that's why, to me, the downgrade and the London riots are part of the same story, because the reason big government winds up debauching the nation's finances is because it debauches the nation's human capital, which to me is a far greater evil. You look at, I disagree with fellas like Peter Ferreira, for example, to a degree. He's written a book which makes a lot of sense about getting the budget into balance and whatever. And in his pitch to Democrats is that you can achieve liberal ends through prudent, fiscally conservative finances. And that's why I part company with him, because I don't want to achieve liberal ends. In other words, I don't want to find a way to make the benefit programs that these British youth, these lighting up the double-decker buses live on. I don't want to find a way to make those affordable. I think the problem with a big government welfare society is, on the one hand, that it's a waste of money, but that in a more profound sense, it's a waste of people's lives, that it leaves them as kind of hollowed out zombie husks who are incapable of leading lives of human dignity. And I don't want to make that affordable.
And at one point in the book, you point out that liberal policies very often nurture a very illiberal culture. So the entitlement state, you note, has produced a far more selfish culture than the supposedly heartless free marketeers ever could. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yes, I think that's true. I think in economic terms, Keynes, who was personally a revolting human being in many respects, not a nice person, and it's kind of in a way remarkable that he's become the most influential economist of the 20th century. And his great soundbite, the one that's in all the books of quotations, is, "In the long run, we are all dead." And in that sense, the Greek rioters, the union workers in Madison, Wisconsin, are Keynesians to the end. They are the logical point of Keynesianism. And all the people, sometimes people who claim to be conservatives, who say, well, look, I paid into Social Security. I want what's coming to me. And you say to them, well, who cares that you paid into it? It's going to kill the nation, and it's going to kill your children's and grandchildren's lives. Grow up. Even if you paid into it, you're going to have to get used to making do with less, because the choice is Deadsville or you getting what you claim to pay for. But that's a Keynesian attitude too. I don't care if it bankrupts the nation, as long as I get mine until I'm dead. When I'm dead, in the long run, we're all dead, and when I'm dead, I don't care. And that's Keynesian, but it's not human. Why do unimportant, nothing people clear land, build a home, plant a tree? Because they understand that civilization is a compact between the present and the past and the future. Why do ordinary men build little towns? The fellows who settled my corner, New Hampshire, in the 1760s, when they saw the land on the way back from the surrender in the French and Indian Wars in Montreal, they came back and they saw this land, and they decided to build communities in the wilderness. Sometimes, planting fruit trees they would never live to enjoy any fruit from. Because ordinary people, the first generation of Americans, understood that life is a compact between the present, the past, and the future. And Keynesianism just tosses all that down the toilet.
Now, if the Keynesians get their way, clearly you're arguing that there's going to be a very serious problem, not just for the United States, but for the world. So what do you see as the declining role of the United States in the so-called international community? What consequences does that have for prosperity and for culture globally? Well,
I think the Sinophiles in Washington somehow think that, the Thomas Friedman types think we're witnessing the rise of China. China is the new superpower. China will be the world's dominant economic power, but it is not an order maker in the sense that the United States has been since the end of the Second World War, and in the sense that Pax Britannica was before that. So simply because China is not interested in order in the world, China has a much narrower view of its role as a great power. The problem isn't that we're going from a world of American order to a new world order, but we're moving into what is more like a no world order, in which the Chinese, the kleptocrats in Russia, the incipient caliphate emerging in Tehran and in Saudi Arabia, they each grab a piece of the action. They're each opportunistic and exploitative. And we live in a far more violent, brutal, and chaotic world, because the idea that the United States, when it's the brokest nation in history, will still be able to operate the Pacific as essentially an American lake, is not credible. I mean, the first thing that happens when great powers decline is that their global reach shrivels, and as European nations discovered, when it's a choice between the welfare lollipops that the citizens are hooked on, or maintaining a military that has global capabilities, the military with global capabilities is the first to go.
And finally, how has your time living in the United Kingdom and in Canada really informed your perspective on America's future?
Well, I think that's why we foreigners often sound a bit more hysterical about this stuff. I was on Fox News the Monday after the downgrade. In other words, the first day that the kind of big shows had really talked about it. And I was talking about it with Neil Cavuto, and I said rather casually, well, the downgrade is what it is, but I don't think anyone can seriously argue that this is with this economy, with these numbers, that this is a AAA nation. And he reeled back in horror and said, boy, you really hate this country, don't you? And I said, no. And I realized at that point, Neil's a smart guy. Eric Bolling, who I also had an altercation with on Fox, who was mocking the 18 countries that now have the AAA rating, Australia and Canada and so forth. And I realized that there's a kind of delusion here on the right too, that somehow they think because America, they essentially subscribe to the same thesis as Obama, that because America was AAA, it will always be AAA. And again, the point I was trying to get over is we foreigners have been there and done that. Cecil Rhodes, in the book, I quote Cecil Rhodes, who said in the 19th century that to be born an Englishman was to win first prize in the lottery of life. And I discovered when I met resistance to the idea of the downgrade from my friends on the right this last week, that there are an awful lot of people on the right who assume that who assume correctly that in the late 20th century to be born a citizen of the United States is to win first prize in the lottery of life, and then they make the same mistake Cecil Rhodes did in the 19th century, that they assume that because it is so at one moment in history, it will always be so. Bernard Shaw said, taunted, he turned the thought around on the eve of the First World War in his play Heartbreak House, and a character says, do you think the laws of God will be suspended in favor of England simply because you were born in it? And one might reformulate it for our times. Do you think the laws of God will be suspended in favor of America simply because you were born in it? The world doesn't work like that. Eventually it says, the guy in the factory in Bangalore is working harder than the guy staying in college until he's 28 doing nothing in Berkeley, and eventually the world adjusts to reflect that reality. And that's the danger for America. And people on the right as well as the left need to understand the urgency of this.
Mark Steyn is the author of After America, Get Ready for Armageddon. Mark, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Lachlan.
For the Heritage Foundation, I'm Lachlan Markay, and thanks for tuning in.